Good evening, y'all. It is that time again. We have the very talented historian and wonderful compatriot from the SCV camp in Detroit, Mr. Jon McCleese, joining us to give a history lesson again. Thank you, John. And before we get started on introductions, just remember, y'all, that the views and opinions expressed here on Mason Dixon Podcast and on MAD and on our new platform, our own and just our own views, and they do not represent the views and opinions of any other person, group, or organization. It's a history program, so I doubt that we're going to get in the weeds of anything, but we just got to make sure. Remember, y'all, we have a stars program. If y'all want to see more statues, all y'all got to do is send us stars. Something as little as giving this video a like, a heart, sharing the video out to as many places as possible gets the word out, as well as letting people know that we are now broadcasting on our own page, which will be the Southern Media Company once the name change is officiated. All right, so I hope I got your title right, John, commander of the Detroit camp?
Well, it's Admiral Raphael Sims Camp 1321, and it was chartered out of Dearborn, Michigan. But we are all over southeastern Michigan, the metro Detroit area. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be back here on Mason Dixon Podcast with you, Vinny. Thanks for having me again.
You're one of the team, John. It's always an honor to have you. And the information, I always love your programs because I learn something each and every time that I never would have even thought about. They are one of a kind and for sure very memorable.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. That's super kind of you. Well, you know, we just celebrated Stonewall Jackson's 200th birthday last Sunday, January 21st. And, you know, Stonewall Jackson is a personal hero of mine. He's my absolute favorite Confederate general. And a lot of that stems from shared faith, you know, between Jackson and I. And his story is so compelling. And it's very long too, of course. You know, I mean, any great general's story is long. But you know, you decided to have me on tonight to talk about Jackson, and I wanted to come on and talk about Jackson's life before the war. So if it's all right with you, I'll go ahead and get cracking on this.
Go on. I'm so excited to hear this, my friend. And everybody watching this, they are super thrilled too. They look forward to your programs. We always get messages. When is John coming on? When is John coming on?
I don't believe you, but I appreciate that.
No, we 100% true, brother. My personal Facebook, on MAD, everywhere. They love the programs and they always look forward to the next history night. So this is perfect.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I hope that I give everybody something that they can take home and learn from tonight. So, you know, some people seem to be born and bred for greatness. Their family pedigree, their upbringing, their schooling, and everything that has shaped their life seems to have been designed to ensure their success. Others seek greatness and strive for years to obtain it. Some never seek it, yet they seem to luck into it without effort. A rare few exist who seem to have been the opposite of them all. From birth, they have to struggle uphill just to have a quote-unquote decent life, never aspiring really to have more than maybe a family, a piece of land, roof over the head, food on the table, and a means by which they can sustain and enjoy it all without a desire to have or be more. The average Joe. But then something happens. An event or a series of events take place that the average Joe didn't cause and never wanted, yet it thrusts him into a position from which greatness can be obtained. And as it turns out, everything that has happened to him in his entire life has unknowingly prepared him to be crowned in fame and glory for the rest of his days and beyond. Thomas Jonathan Jackson was such a man. He was born in Western Virginia, now called West Virginia, in the town of Clarksburg, to Jonathan and Julia Neal Jackson on January 21st, 1824, the third of four children that would be produced by this union. And the picture that we're going to is a picture, an illustration of his birthplace. The Jackson family that had settled in this part of the country had mostly done well for themselves up to this point, but Thomas's father, Jonathan, was a bit of a ne'er-do-well. Though a popular lawyer in the area, he struggled at the practice and had a gambling problem that had already put him and his family deep in debt. Deep personal loss marked Jackson's life early on. On March the 6th, 1826, less than 2 months after his second birthday, and with his mother ready to give birth to his last full-blooded sibling any day, little Thomas was by the bedside of his oldest sister, Elizabeth, when she died of typhoid fever at the age of 6. Due to Julia being in the family way and soon expecting, much of the care for the ailing child prior to her death was left to Jonathan, and this is a picture of Jonathan. As a result, he contracted the deadly fever as well. 20 days after losing his sister, Thomas's father followed her in death at the age of 35. And the next day, his mother gave birth to a baby girl that she named Laura Ann. Now a widow at the age of 28, Julia had to find a way to provide for her 3 children, Warren, Thomas, and Laura, while settling the debts left to her by her dead husband. She sold off nearly all their worldly possessions, including the family home in Clarksburg. And for the next 4 years, the family lived in poverty while she attempted to support her kids with jobs teaching and sewing. The children had barely more than stringy rags to wear, thus bringing about the charity of neighbors to help keep them clothed and fed. The weight of her losses and continued struggles drained her emotionally and physically, and eventually she began showing symptoms of early stage tuberculosis. In the fall of 1830, Julia remarried to an attorney named Blake Woodson. No doubt she hoped that this would be a move that would provide for her and her struggling family. But Woodson, 15 years her elder and already the father of 8 children, was no better with his money than Jonathan had been. Early on, he began to take out his frustrations regarding finances on his stepchildren. In public, he put on a great show of being engaging and outgoing with the kids, but in private, he was verbally abusive to them. In the summer of 1831, Woodson was appointed to serve in the government of the newly created Fayette County, so he purchased a dilapidated house on 50 acres of worthless land near the new county seat of Ansted, 125 miles west of Clarksburg, where he would fare even worse financially. Julia, now deeper into failing health and once again expecting child, became desperate to obtain some relief from life's strains. First, she sent her oldest son, Warren, age 10, to live with her brother in Parkersburg. She was reluctant to send her younger 2 children away until she felt there was no other choice. At a time when they were clinging to her for love and strength, she sent Thomas and Laura to live with their paternal aunts and step-grandmother at Jackson's Mill, 25 miles south of Clarksburg. Here, their female relatives gave some of the familial love and affection that their young hearts and minds desired, but it couldn't replace that which comes from a mother. Julia gave birth on October 7th, 1831, to a boy named William Woodson. Her health now completely wrecked by tuberculosis, the pregnancy and delivery of a healthy child was a miracle in and of itself, but it hastened the end of her days. Lingering fever and chronic dysentery over the next few weeks further deteriorated her condition to the point that she called for all of her children to be brought to her bedside. Young Tom and Laura were brought back to Ansted, where they would receive from their mother a final blessing and farewell before she finally succumbed to death at the age of 33 on December 4th, 1831. And here's a picture of her gravesite. Now, at age 7, Thomas Jackson was an orphan. He and Laura were taken back to be with the family at Jackson's Mill, where the women of the family continued to provide as much love as they could give. Upon the death of their step-grandmother in 1835, however, it was decided that Laura would be sent to live with their maternal Neal family in Parkersburg. Young Tom was sent to live with another aunt and uncle, but he had grown so used to life with the Jacksons and the stability of life at the mill, a picture of which you can see here, that he returned there of his own accord. Jackson's Mill was an environment that was bustling with industry and commerce, and it was here that Jackson was really introduced to practical lessons in farming, timber work, and horsemanship. Life at the mill was lonely for a boy, void of much fun or others to enjoy playtime with, and without much affection or love for an adolescent. The closest he grew to anyone was his Uncle Cummings, Jackson, who helped him learn how to be a disciplined individual in a work environment. The relationship between them was not really a loving familial one, as much as it was like that of a teacher and a student, or a craftsman and his apprentice. But Jackson later remembered Uncle Cummings as being as much of a father as he could have ever understood the term for his own young life. The previous picture, if you would, Vinny. I'm sorry. And that is a picture of Uncle Cummings' house. Just to give you an idea of where Jackson lived and what it looked like when he was there. It's not from the time that he was there, though. Now you can go ahead and flip back to the other one. In the spring of 1836, older brother Warren, now a successful school teacher at the age of 16 in Upshur County, visits the family at Jackson's Mill en route to visit sister Laura in Parkersburg. Thomas, now age 12, is happy to see his older brother and joins him on the trip. The reunion with Laura was a thrill for Thomas, the two being so close and having endured so much of the same sorrows and hardships. While on this journey, Warren got the idea that he and Tom could make a living together selling wood to steamships traveling up and down the Ohio River. Enticed by the idea, the two of them went off up the river, traveling around 800 miles before eventually settling in a deserted cabin on an island in the Mississippi River near the southwest corner of Kentucky. This is an illustration of what it looked like when the two boys were doing this work. For 6 months, they toiled at cutting wood for passing steamers. The work was hard, the income was little, food scarce, and comfort nowhere to be found. The two boys wound up contracting malaria, and thanks only to a charitable steamboat captain, made their way back down the river to the Parkersburg home of their Neal relatives in February of 1837. Poorer, but wiser for the experience, Thomas returned to Jackson's Mill. Warren went back to teaching in Upshur County. He never really recovered his health, though, after the trip, and eventually died as a result at about the age of 20 in 1841. Sister Laura would be the only real family he had left upon reaching his adult life. And seemingly nothing other than distance could come between them after so much adversity had welded them together. The next few years, Thomas's teen years, were largely spent working a handful of local jobs while pursuing an education. which was hard to come by in those rural backwoods schools so typical of the region and the time. The pre-adult years of Thomas Jackson were filled with sadness and hardship. Very little of that which makes happy childhood memories existed for him. And as an adult, he would speak of those years with only those whom he allowed to get the closest. Through a strange set of events, in 1842, Jackson became a cadet at the United States Military Academy at West Point. He failed the initial entry examination, but the young lad who had beat him out for it barely arrived at the academy when he realized how hard it would be and returned home. After being informed of this, a determined young Jackson made the difficult trek to visit his congressman in Washington, D.C., a distant Jackson cousin. The congressman was unaware that the other boy had dropped out, and Jackson had been impressive in athletics and mathematics during the examinations. Desiring to have a youth from his district in the academy, and impressed by the young man's determination, the congressman endorsed Jackson's appointment and fast-tracked it to the desk of the Secretary of War for final approval, which was given. Here's an illustration of Thomas Jackson going on into West Point. He entered West Point about as unprepared for what was to come as any cadet had ever been. And since he barely passed the final entry exams, the life of his military education and career were on the chopping block from the word go. Few, if any, would have imagined him making it through all 4 years. But Jackson likely realized that this was the best opportunity he would ever have to make something of himself. And so he determined within himself to succeed. He would struggle with learning foreign languages, and the subject of land topography was seemingly beyond his grasp. But his excellence in math, good behavior, and dogged persistence to study and improve himself in the areas where he lacked helped carry him through to the finish line. He did receive demerits over the course of his cadet career, but it was never for misbehavior. It was always for things like being late for roll call, torn clothes, and unpolished buttons. The kind of things that might be overlooked when you're focusing on studying in all-night cram sessions better before facing an important exam. Something I think you might know about, Vinny. One of Jackson's most famous quotes stems from this period in his life. In a notebook where he wrote down inspirational maxims and ideas that he found to be important, he penned the line, "You may be whatever you resolve to be." This one line might be the defining line of his life, and it certainly characterizes the determination that got him to graduation. In his 1842 entrance exam, he was in the bottom 10% out of 123. But he survived and climbed to become one of the 59 who graduated in 1846, ranking 17th in what is often referred to as the Academy's greatest class. Of those who graduated that year, Jackson was likely the least memorable based solely on his time there. He took part in no social activities and had only a handful of friends. Had there never been a war during his lifetime, no one would likely know his name today. Upon graduating with a second lieutenant's commission, he was immediately sent off to serve with Company K, 1st U.S. Artillery Regiment, in the war with Mexico that was already a couple of months hot when he graduated. This is a colorized version of the first earliest known photograph of Thomas Jonathan Jackson. During the Mexican-American War, Jackson served with distinction in the Siege of Veracruz and the battles of Contreras, Chapultepec, and Mexico City, and was fully promoted to the rank of first lieutenant and received 2 battle-earned brevet promotions to the rank of brevet major. Jackson found that he loved the military and discovered his niche in war. But after the conflict with Mexico was ended, he soon found a strong dislike of the peacetime internal Army politics between officers. It was during his time in the Army as a cadet and then as an officer that he first came into contact with so many of those men whose names would be associated with his during the last 2 years of his life. In his graduating class were such names as George Pickett, David R. Jones, William Gardner, Cadmus Wilcox, and Burkitt Fry, all of whom would become generals in the Confederate Army. Plus, George B. McClellan, who would be the top general of the Federal Army that Jackson often caused so much trouble during the years of 1861 and 62. During the war in Mexico, Jackson either served with or at least was acquainted with men such as Daniel Harvey Hill, John H. Winder, John B. Magruder, Bernard B., who would later give Jackson his most famous nickname, and a 40-year-old Army captain whose name would later become linked to his own for the rest of time, Robert E. Lee. It was also while serving in the Army that Jackson made his first adult pursuits to learn about God and faith. It's impossible to talk about Jackson without talking about this aspect of his life that would come to dominate every fiber of his being. Jackson wasn't raised in a particularly religious household, though he seemed to recall his mother being of the Methodist faith. While living at Jackson's Mill as a teenager, he acquired his first Bible from a friend who was a very devout believer, and the words of that holy book spoke to him. He would attend worship services at a local Baptist church, as well as occasionally walking 3 miles to worship with a Methodist congregation. It appears from his letters that this was when he first decided to follow Jesus Christ. As he entered adulthood, he would still read the Bible, and later he attended chapel services as a cadet at West Point, but he admitted in his writings that it was during these years he returned into the world. It was in Mexico where Jackson truly began to cultivate the relationship with his Creator that he began in childhood. And during these war years, when he was first known to regularly pray, read scripture, study theology, and search for the faith community that he would join. After leaving Mexico, Jackson was stationed for a couple of years at Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn, New York. And it was during this time that he was baptized into the Episcopal Church. Now, by the year of 1851, the luster of being in the military had largely worn off. He had recently been reassigned to serve at Fort Meade in Florida, a move that did not seem promising for one looking to move up in rank and pay. And soon after arriving, a personal feud with a superior officer developed and weighed heavily upon him. In the midst of these issues, he received a letter from the board of directors of a military academy in his native state, offering him to take a professorship. Jackson wrestled with this decision, but in the end, he made the difficult choice to resign from the Army, return to Virginia, and accept this new role, still connected to the military, but without all of the uncertainties of Army life. About as unprepared for this new job as he was when he arrived at West Point 9 years prior, the 27-year-old brevet major arrived in Lexington, Virginia in the spring of '51 to accept his new position as the artillery instructor and professor of natural and experimental philosophy at the Virginia Military Institute. Jackson was a unique student when he was the one doing the learning, and didn't relate well to how others learn or process information. Each afternoon, he would prepare and recite his next day's lesson, then come in the next day and deliver it to the class word for word. If a cadet asked for him to expound further or give another explanation regarding some part of the lesson, Jackson would simply rewind the tape in his mind and repeat exactly what he had said about it the first time, word for word. He also demanded strict military discipline from his students, just as he had demanded of him in the Army. At first, the students hated him as an instructor, with some students writing in their notebooks things like, "He is the worst teacher God ever made." But as these freshmen grew into juniors and seniors, they grew to have a respect for the man that they once called Tom Fool. They started writing in those notebooks things like, "I can't stand the way he teaches optics, but if I ever have to go to war, I want to serve under him." Later, some of these young men did go off to war to serve under him, with many of them dying for him and the cause he was fighting for. Jackson also came to Lexington totally unprepared for the town's social life. He was never taught proper table etiquette, never really had learned how to carry on small talk conversation, and was in general about as backward as one could be. One thing about Jackson that made him seem so strange were his quirks regarding his physical health. Jackson was a bit of a hypochondriac. It's like he thought every organ in his body was failing him when it wasn't. And that alone can cause you to develop health issues. But Jackson truly did suffer from some type of what they would call dyspepsia, which is a bit of a 19th century catch-all term for the various forms of indigestion. To combat this, Jackson had some strange ideas. He believed that eating rich foods was bad for you. So he chose to eat that which he didn't like. And he came to determine what to eat by experimentation. He would try eating bread with butter on it, and then without. And upon realizing that he preferred the bread with the butter, he would choose that from here on out, I'll eat it without it. He never used pepper to enhance his food because, as he told one local hostess, it made his left leg itch. When invited to a party, he would first eat his bland dinner at home and then attend, turning down all offers of food while nursing a glass of water. Now, we might look back at all this and chuckle a bit, but for Jackson, it worked to keep down the pains of dyspepsia. And he certainly was never going to be diagnosed with high cholesterol. Another belief that he held that was unusual for the time was a ridiculous idea that exercise was beneficial for the body. And he engaged in a regimen of movements that one might call an early form of aerobics. Unfortunately for him, socially speaking, is that he would engage in these wild movements of his arms and legs while sometimes jumping as he was walking down the road to teach class or attend some social function. These habits, combined with his generally awkward nature, led people to mock and make fun of him, considering him eccentric at best and a bit off at worst. Yet in time, the people came to know and accept him as he was. And Jackson himself did make strides in becoming more socially adjusted. Jackson would live in Lexington for a total of 10 years. And during that time, he would become a property owner, a member of the board of directors of 2 banks, and a part owner of several important businesses in Lexington. Excuse me. His years in this small college town was also the time in his life when he finally came to find himself and his place in a spiritual sense. In the first 3 months after his arrival in 1851, he discovered and fell in love with the Lexington Presbyterian Church. And this is a colorized image of the church as Jackson probably would recognize it. Since then, it's had a facelift, and it looks the same in structure, but it's not got the same style on the outside. It's got more of a refined look now. But that's how Jackson would probably recognize his church. When he was accepted into that congregation as a member that fall, he announced to those attending that he would never knowingly violate the will of God. And there is no record from that point that he ever did. As a man with a military mind, he served God and his church without question. He regarded his pastor like a superior officer in the army of God. And just as a subordinate officer would do, made constant reports to the pastor of his religious activities and theological views. And any request the pastor made of him was treated as an official order. He read his Bible and prayed daily and was strict in observing the Sabbath and keeping it holy. In fact, Jackson refused to do anything on a Sunday that wasn't God-centered. He wouldn't read a newspaper or discuss anything secular on the holy day, and went so far as to not mail letters late in the week if he thought that they would be in transit on a Sunday. As devout as even he was still human. Though he was a great prayer warrior in private, he was barely able to speak coherently when first asked to pray aloud in public. His pastor described it as painful to all hearers. But Jackson insisted that he not be spared from this duty. He wanted to have the chance to improve, and in time, he would be more casual and fluent in publicly speaking to God than he ever was in conversing with a stranger standing before him. Jackson also struggled with staying awake during a church service. He believed that it had something to do with his dyspepsia. But whatever the case was, it didn't matter. Nor did it matter how exciting or moving the service was. The minister would barely have delivered his opening sentences before Jackson would be sound asleep. Those that were seated around him would sometimes poke or prod him, trying to stir him awake. Lady once even went so far as to poke him with a hat pin, but nothing worked. A popular story that went around town said that a noted hypnotist came to speak at a local auditorium, and all of the faculty of VMI and the nearby Washington College were invited to attend. With a packed crowd, the mesmerist called on a volunteer, and Jackson came up to the podium. The mesmerist began his process, whatever it was, in an attempt to bring his subject to a point susceptible to suggestion. But no matter how hard he tried, Jackson sat there staring at the hypnotist unfazed. First, snickers and then chuckles of amusement began to come from the audience, and then one young gal stood up and declared, "No one can put Major Jackson to sleep but the Reverend Dr. White," which brought the crowd to a roar of laughter. Jackson would eventually become an ordained deacon in his congregation, and over time became involved with the town's larger faith community outside of the Presbyterian Church. He helped to organize and lead a Bible society, and as you've probably heard, he helped start a Sunday school for African Americans where he taught them to read the Bible, a controversial and possibly illegal act in that day and age. He loved all of Scripture and strove to keep all of its commandments. His two favorite Bible verses were Romans 8:28, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and to them who are the called according to his purpose," and Revelation 21:4, "And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away." These verses helped him make sense of all of the hardships in life that he had endured in his youth, providing the comfort of a reason for all things and the promise of a better day to come. As he grew socially within his faith community, he became friends with the president of nearby Washington College, the Reverend Dr. George Junkin. And this led him to becoming friendly with the Reverend's daughter, Eleanor. Thomas and Ellie both began teaching Sunday school classes at church in February of 1852. And over the months that followed, their friendship grew into more. At a visit to the home of his old military friend and Washington College professor, Daniel Harvey Hill, it was noted that Jackson's unusual conversation topics of faith and academics had been replaced by talk of Miss Ellie. Jackson said, "I don't know what's changed me." And the Hills burst out into laughter as they informed the major that he was in love. And he was. Thomas and Ellie were engaged in the early part of 1853, and the Reverend Dr. Junkin performed the ceremony, uniting his 28-year-old daughter in marriage to 29-year-old Major Thomas Jackson in the parlor of the Washington College president's home on August 4th of that year. And this is a picture of the Washington College president's home. And you'll see here what Jackson probably looked like or close to it around the time, and a picture there of Miss Eleanor. Finally, just before reaching the age of 30, Jackson had obtained the one thing that had eluded him throughout his life: a real home, a family atmosphere, the special kind of love that such an association fosters. And more blessings seemed to follow into the new year when it became apparent that he was going to be a father. These experiences transformed Jackson in a way that was undeniable to those who had watched his life since arriving in Lexington. He was happier, more confident socially, and even became less heavy-handed toward the cadets at the Institute. As the months ticked away toward the birth of Jackson's first child, they were happy, Ellie seemed healthy, and they had no reason to expect any complication. Then, on Sunday, October 22nd, 1854, Ellie went into labor, and when she delivered, it was a stillborn son. The doctor left them thinking Ellie was going to be all right, but an uncontrollable hemorrhage began within an hour afterward that would prove fatal. When it seemed as if Jackson had finally made his way beyond the valley of toil, death, and sorrow that had been his first 30 years of life, in a twinkling of an eye, it was all stripped away. His wife and son taken by death, as had been nearly everyone Jackson had ever loved. In the hours and days immediately following, Jackson never showed any outward expression of grief beyond wearing a mourning ribbon on his hat and sword handle, but inside he was crushed. Such an experience could have crushed his faith in God, and in many others it would have. But Jackson thought of God as the only friend who would never leave or forsake him. It was during this period Jackson wrote in his book of maxims the following: objects to be affected by Ellie's death: to eradicate ambition, to eradicate resentment, to produce humility. If you desire to be more heavenly minded, think more of the things of heaven and less of the things of earth. To a friend, he confessed, quote, I do not see the purpose of God in this, the most bitter, trying affliction of my life. But I will try to be submissive, though it breaks my heart. The The heartbroken, spirit-wounded Jackson became reclusive over the weeks and months that followed, only venturing out to attend to the things that he was obligated or committed to. In the summer of 1855, he took a trip to visit his sister Laura, who he had stayed in communication with through letters all of these years, and to revisit the sights and scenes of his childhood. This only made things worse, as the sadness of his past was brought forward to meet his sad present. Upon returning to Lexington, Jackson immersed himself in his work at VMI and with the church, but in private he was still going through his dark night of the soul. Jackson finally began to exit this spiritual valley when he took a trip to Europe in the summer of 1856. Over 3 months, beginning in July, he visited England, Scotland, Belgium, France, Germany, Switzerland, and Italy. What he sought from the trip was a broadening of knowledge through things cultural. But what he really got was a realization that beauty and happiness could still be found in the world that God had created. And this revelation also opened Jackson's heart to the idea that maybe, if God was willing, he could find personal love and happiness again. Mary Anna Morrison lived in North Carolina, but was the sister-in-law of Daniel Harvey Hill. And she met Jackson during a visit with the Hills in Lexington while Jackson was engaged to Ellie, and he had not forgotten her. He sent her a letter in the fall of '56. Then, during his winter break from VMI, he took a trip to visit the Hills at their new home in North Carolina, where he began to truly court her. Things moved quickly, because before he returned to Lexington, he had already made his intentions known to Anna's father and successfully asked for her hand in marriage. On Thursday, July 16th, 1857, less than 1 week before Anna's 26th birthday, she and Thomas were wed at the home of her parents. And before their honeymoon was over, she was with child. And this is a picture of the home of her parents where they were wed. Anna's time with child passed without incident. And a baby girl that was named Mary Graham Jackson was born to the couple on April 30th, 1858. The mother and child both appeared to have come through the delivery with no problem. And the major was so excited that he wrote 3 letters that night to tell loved ones of the great news. Little Mary, however, was not all right. Lethargy and a yellow hue to her skin color indicated a problem. It was a problem with her liver, and she died on May 25th. Now burying his second child in 4 years, Jackson tried again to grieve only inwardly as he had done before. But now he also had a wife to be strong for, and it took a toll on his physical and mental health. He took a temporary leave of absence from his positions with the church in order to rest his mind and body, and the couple took a trip to New York for further R&R. Now I'm going to have you go through a couple of the pictures here, Vinny. That's the house where he and Anna were married. All right, and then, all right, there you go. And this is a picture of what Jackson looked like around the year of 1857. About the time, what he might have looked like when they got married. If you'll go to the next picture, please. And here's Jackson and his wife, his second wife, there with VMI in the background, as it would have looked at the time that Jackson was there. All right, you can go ahead and move on to the next image. The purchase of a house that fall, the first that he had truly ever owned, and the work of getting it furnished occupied their minds and helped them start to regain a sense of happiness. They moved in just before his 35th birthday in January 1859. Having their own home to share together in privacy was the medicine they needed. They found happiness spending time together in prayer and Bible study, working a garden and having company over. And Jackson seemed more at ease in casual settings than ever before, speaking freely in conversation with ease and even somewhat being entertaining. During this time, the two also were praying for another opportunity at raising a child of their own. Among the students he taught and the folks in town, Jackson finally came to be considered a respected and even popular member of the community. By the fall of 1859, he was feeling well enough to resume his duties with the Black Sunday School and the church. Life could seemingly not have been going better, but he had a constant fear that at any moment it could all be taken away from him. That October, an event occurred that sent shockwaves throughout the nation, when a psychotic homegrown terrorist named John Brown led an attempted raid on a U.S. military arsenal in the western Virginia town of Harper's Ferry. A U.S. Marine, a town mayor, and 5 civilians were killed by Brown's terrorist forces in the attempted raid and subsequent standoff. Another U.S. Marine and 8 more civilians were wounded in the event. Brown's stated goal was to capture the weapons needed to arm a slave revolt against Southern whites. Brown was captured by U.S. military forces commanded by Army Colonel Robert E. Lee after a standoff that lasted for nearly a day and a half. And he was subsequently tried for charges of treason against the Commonwealth of Virginia, murder, and inciting a slave insurrection. Found guilty on all charges, he was sentenced to death by hanging. With rumors swirling that an attempt to rescue Brown would be made by his sympathizers, Governor Henry Wise called for VMI to send 2 companies of infantry and 2 artillery batteries to ensure that nothing stood in the way of justice at the execution in Charlestown. Jackson was placed in command of the artillery, and while no such rescue was attempted, he was excited to actually and finally perform service in the field for the first time in 8 years. Jackson had seen the storm clouds of disunion brewing over the nation for no less than 5 years. And over the next 12 months, the issues dividing the country would prove to overcome the ties that had bound the states together, culminating in the election of a president wholly unfavorable to the Southern states and their interests. Jackson was personally a Union man. He prayed for a peaceful resolution to things, and he wrote to his sister Laura, saying, quote, "If, after we have done all that we can do for an honorable preservation of the Union, there shall be a determination on the part of the free states to deprive us of our right, which the fair interpretation of the Constitution, as already decided by the federal court, guarantees to us, then I am in favor of secession." But after Virginia seceded from the Union on April 17, 1861, his course was decided for him. His wife wrote years later, "He loved the Union as only one who had fought under the flag could love it. He would have died to have saved it in its purity and just relations. But he believed that the constitutional rights of the states had been invaded, and he never had a doubt as to where his allegiance was due. His sword belonged to his state." The issue of union or disunion divided many families, and Jackson's was no different, as it cost him the last relationship that he still held from his youth. From the outset of the strife between the states, his sister Laura, who is pictured here, was a Unionist, and not just an adherent, but a defiant activist. These two, who had held to one another through so much shared tragedy and heartbreak, and remained in constant contact through letters over the years, were now completely at odds with one another. Jackson wrote to her about spiritual matters about a week before Virginia seceded. And that was the last time either attempted to reach out to the other. After war commenced, she allegedly said that she, quote, could take care of the wounded Federals as fast as Brother Thomas could wound them. Brother Thomas indeed knew of her activities, but never spoke ill of her. Upon learning of her brother's death in 1863, a Union soldier recalled her as saying she would rather know that he was dead than to have him a leader in the rebel army. Shortly after sunrise on April 21st, a Sunday, Jackson's doorbell rang with orders to report to VMI for the purpose of leading a corps of cadets to the state capital of Richmond. He donned his best faculty uniform, spent a few quality moments with his wife, and then walked out the door to do his duty to his state and his God. Over the next 2 years, the ruddy, poor orphan boy, who with God's help had pulled himself up by his bootstraps to become a husband, homeowner, businessman, church leader, and major in the State Guard, would become one of the greatest military leaders this world had ever known. Every loss, every hardship, every single obstacle that he had faced had prepared him for all that would lie ahead. And soon he would be known and celebrated throughout the world as Lieutenant General Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson. And the title of the presentation that I just delivered is The Blocks That Built the Wall.
I am speechless because, as always, the amount of information that I had no idea about before. Jon, a job well done as always. And I know the audience is going to agree when they're seeing this recording tomorrow.
I can tell you that I have I've put together 2 more presentations, and Vinny has graciously told me that he'll allow me to deliver them as we go further into the spring and summer to cover the rest of Jackson's life. And in putting together these presentations, there have been several times where I have broken down and cried at his hardships that he faced, and the things that he had to overcome. The thing about his sister at the end is just heart-wrenching. I mean, it rips my guts out. To have your only childhood connection go against you like that, that is, I can't even imagine. And for Jackson to not give in to the temptation, to join her side, to stand with her, and to do what he had to do and stand up for what he believed was right and what was right. Incredible. I'm not, I said earlier at the start of the program that one of the things that I find that connects me with Jackson so much is our shared faith. And I do share a similar theology with Jackson. But I'm not even a tenth of the Christian that Jackson was. But he's a role model for me. He's an inspiration for me to do better and be better in that aspect of my life and in all other aspects of my life.
I agree with that, because the way that he truly embodied what it was to be a Christian, to always be his best self, to always try. He knew he wasn't perfect, but he really tried hard. And there's something to be said for that, because how he would treat the Sabbath, how he would treat Sundays, the story about the mail. How dedicated is that? And this was at a time before we had, any regulations that said Sunday there's going to be no mail. It's, essentially our holy day. He never, he never thought twice about that. And that's really just admirable when you think about that.
It really is. There's a story. I hadn't heard it when I first put the presentation together. If you don't mind, I'll share it real quick.
Please do.
So it was after Jackson had married Mariana, his second wife, and while they were on their honeymoon, he had went to some kind of they were somewhere, far from home, and there was some kind of a horse race or something that he wanted to witness. It was like a military horse race or something, and he wanted to witness it, but it was on a Sunday. And she told him that she didn't think he should do it, but apparently he went. He did it. And then after he came back, he regretted it very, very deeply and promised that he would never, ever again make such a mistake. That even just the fact that they were away from home, that this is a one-time opportunity, he'll probably never be able to do it again. He decided, you know what, in the future, I'm never, ever going to let that be a reason to not keep the Sabbath holy. I mean, I can tell you this right now, Vinny, I've missed church on plenty of Sundays, man.
Guilty as charged right here. Actually going to be guilty next week, because what they do. Right? There's been times where SCV reunion. What else? We usually have a prayer breakfast, so that kind of So that's kind of like you still get your faith in there and you still do your praying, which is a good thing.
Right.
So I hope that makes up for somewhat. Going for my clinical residencies, when I got to go to Minnesota, and we're there on a Sunday for school, and I'm just like, dang it. So I try to do a virtual one, but there's times where I just, and I realize I'm like, I wish I could be like Stonewall. I wish I could have more dedication. I wish that I could, try harder. And this is what's just so nice about our Confederate heroes and patriots, is they influence us today with inspiration.
Absolutely.
The grave sites, we gain inspiration from their memorials, and it makes us a better human being.
As our fellow video podcaster, David Pope, always likes to point out the quote from Douglas Southall Freeman. We don't go to the shrines of our heroes for worship, but we go there for inspiration. And that's a fact. As much as we revere Jackson, we don't worship him. But my goodness, he certainly is inspiring. And if we could just live our lives just a fraction as inspiring as Jackson, what might we be able to accomplish? And what might we be able to influence somebody in a way that they even accomplish more and greater?
Absolutely. And, him as an educator, he inspired me to be a better teacher, a better educator, when, he would really encourage the students, to buckle down. And when at first they thought, oh, he's difficult, he's hard, but they didn't realize at first what a blessing he was doing them, not only preparing them for further studies, but for the real world. And some of those students would fight with him. So to have that connection with your professor, me as a student now, and me as a lifelong learner, me as an educator, is something that it really just jives my mind, because I'm guilty. I've had professors, because I keep a journal. I'm a big believer in journals, because it helps you just organize your thoughts, helps you become a better speaker and reader and writer. I've had professors that when I started this whole degree journey in higher education, I thought I couldn't do it. They pushed me to a limit I've never been pushed to before. How to keep my Bible near me to keep me honest, language-wise. Wrote in that journal, and looking back now, I didn't realize what a favor they were doing me and our fellow classmates by preparing us to be able to up our game and go to the next level. And some of those professors we actually would work with in person. So it really was just, that whole theme is classic right there.
100%. I know the hardest teachers that I ever had in school made me a better student. Teachers that I could not stand to be in their classroom because they were so strict and they were so forceful on, you have to learn the material. My goodness, I was not like Jackson. Math was not my strong suit. I was awful at math. But I had just one or two teachers in school that their persistence on teaching me math actually helped me. And I know that now. I can look back and mark that down and say that if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be any good with numbers. So yeah, absolutely. There's so many other aspects. I mean, look, I just covered a fraction of Jackson's life. It's like a nutshell size version of his life leading up to the war. There's so many other parts of his life and aspects. And actually, if I could, I'll tell you some resources. If anybody's interested in doing their own research and really doing deep dive on Jackson, there is a book that's called, I believe it's called Stonewall Jackson, The Legend, the Soldier, the Man, or something like that. Anyway, it's by James I. Robertson, aka Bud Robertson, who was professor emeritus of history at Virginia Tech University. He did what I consider personally to be the definitive Jackson biography. Now, there's a much earlier one by, I believe it's Robert Louis Dabney, who was chaplain on Jackson's staff and one of his top aides. And Dabney, a lot of what we know about Jackson, and especially during the war, comes from Dabney. But Robertson, when he was researching the book that he wrote, I mean, he even went to West Point and had to go through the hoops to get basically clearance to go through their records, because we're talking about going into a military school's records. And even though they were from 150 years ago, he had to go through all this clearance to even be able to look at Jackson's school records and his books. The amount of research he did, I personally don't believe that there was anybody of our time, and Robertson's passed away within the last couple of years now, but nobody within our time of life comes close to saying, I know Stonewall Jackson, like Bud Robertson could say he knew Stonewall Jackson. So that's one incredible resource. Another one is a book called Rebel Yell by Gwynn, is the author's last name. Now, this is a book that I've heard a lot of people talk about, and I guess because I read Robertson first, I didn't really go for Rebel Yell right away. But I recently finished it on audiobook, and it has enough material in it, and it's in a different form. He presents a different way than what Robertson presents. That it's worth having on the bookshelf. I'm going to get a hardcover copy to have on the bookshelf. And then also I have, just as for my own personal, to say that I have one, I have a first edition copy of Marianna Morrison Jackson's book that she published about her husband. And I didn't use any of it in putting this particular presentation together, but in the final of these three, I did use some of the stuff from her book. And I look forward to sharing that later on down the road.
Both of those books, I haven't read the first, but I have read parts of Rebel Yell, and I agree. It's both of them are very thorough. I've heard about the first one and heard about how good it was, but I do know there's a difference in how it's presented, which that's fine, because that's, what
Yeah.
history really is, the studies. There is so much about this gentleman's life to that point that you made. And, this is what I like. When you study the person and you study their lives, there's different levels to study: the individual, their family level, their community level, the involvement with the church, which is even more of a difficult analysis when doing history, because there's so much that occurred, different religious movements and variations at that time. His early upbringing. As a psychologist, I always love the person-centered, studies. And here you have this person that had the odds just completely stacked against him. My favorite, John, is when people say, quote unquote, white privilege, something that doesn't exist.
Right.
This man had no privilege whatsoever. None. Poverty, loss of parents, loss of family, tragedy, loss of a first wife, loss of children. So much that could have just derailed him, caused him to go down a road of just maladaptive behavior, hitting the bottle, gambling. He did not let that impact him one bit, because he was a man of God, and he allowed himself to embrace the faith and to just live the faith. And there's something so just amazing about that he was fatherless and he was able to overcome the challenges. And in psychology, you have things like protective factors and factors that harm. He had almost no protective factors early on, and yet came out to be this amazing Christian patriot that we know today.
Absolutely. Despite the fact that he never really got to experience, a mother's love the way that you and I have, or whatever most of us have, throughout his entire childhood, he wound up becoming one of the most loving husbands and fathers to his own wife and child, even though he didn't have those examples in his life to draw on. Somehow or another, he was a great husband and a great father to his own child, what little time he had with his child, which we get to later on down the road, because he did go on to have a child that lived. And if you read anything that Marianna Morrison Jackson wrote about Stonewall, it's about what a loving and affectionate husband that he was. When we get to the next presentation, I don't dwell quite as much on family relationships, but you find that when they have the opportunity to be together during the war, I mean, he's unrecognizable to his own soldiers and fellow generals and officers, because it's like a night and day transformation. He goes from being this hardened battle warrior to being just a dude who loves his wife and enjoys the company of children. It's really quite astounding for somebody who had none of that as a child himself.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but he was very playful. Like, he had a playful side to him with his wife. And I always love giving this example as a psychologist when it comes to building a better relationship. I'm a firm believer in a nice, good scare prank. And I know that his wife, two things his wife did not like. Mrs. Jackson did not like insects. She didn't like any kind of arachnid, even a butterfly. She'd be running screaming. She did not like scare pranks. And Stonewall used to scare the living daylights out of her. He would hide behind rooms and go, "Oh!" And the one time he got her so good, they said the scream could be heard practically throughout the whole town.
Oh, wow, that's crazy. You're absolutely right. He had an incredible playful side. It's almost like that when he had those brief moments, he turned into the child that he could never be when he was a child.
That's right.
And not in a bad way, not in a destructive way, not in a way that's regressive, but in a way that was productive for the people that were around him, the people that needed him to be that. You read about him staying at people's homes during the war, and they had children, and what a playful individual he was with their children. He loved that. It was a transformation true transformation in the man when he had the opportunity to be that way. And he didn't care who was around and who saw it.
That's what I loved about him, is that he also knew that, like, you know, a time and place for everything. He knew how to also kind of uplift people. He had that way about him where I always love comparing him and General Lee, because, you know, when you look at some of the differences, they're not bad differences. General Lee had a different way of his personality. Stonewall has his, but both of them, despite the odds against them, still became two of the most iconic Virginians in Lexington. And I can tell you this, every year I've been going to Lee Jackson Day, which when I started, it was huge. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Amen. People are waking up. A lot more younger people are joining on because they are tired of seeing what's happening. And we are still honoring and gaining inspiration from these two Confederate patriots and two amazing statesmen to this day. His 200th birthday was a smashing success in Lexington. I am beyond grateful for everybody, the Stonewall Brigade, the Virginia Flaggers, the OCR, the local UDC, every organization that made that possible, and the Metcalf, and everyone who showed up. It was just absolutely wonderful to see everybody united, everybody getting along for the common goal of celebrating this amazing man's 200th birthday with presentations, flagging, giving people education out in the streets. We were waving our battle flags. There was a wonderful gentleman from France who came up to us and said, I just want to say this makes me so happy. He took a lot of photos with our flags and our uniforms. He sang Dixie. And he even said it in his own country, France, it's getting woke. He said it was never like that. And he prays that Dixie doesn't end up like that. And we said, as long as there's blood in my body, as long as I got spirit in me, I'll be fighting to the end with this to keep our heritage alive.
We have to. We have to, because the Southern tradition, the Southern culture is the greatest American culture that has ever existed. When we talk about Southern culture, other people think, well, they're celebrating something bad. No. We're celebrating all of the best aspects of Southern life, of American life. We're celebrating family. We're celebrating faith. We're celebrating great food. We're celebrating military valor. I mean, all of these things are things that are good and to be looked at and emulated. Who can say? I mean, I don't know anybody who could take an honest look at the life of Thomas Jonathan Jackson or Robert Edward Lee and honestly tell me I would not want my children to grow up to be like these men. If you don't want your kids to grow up to be like them, then who in God's green earth would you want them to grow up to be like? Some of these degenerates that we highlight in our society today, I certainly hope not. These were two of the most remarkable Americans who ever existed. And I mean, President Eisenhower, he said what it would be like if all of us, if all of America strove to emulate men like Lee and Jackson, that it would be the greatest country ever.
We would be in such a better position that we are as a nation. Christian values, family values, honoring our ancestors' heritage, the celebrations, that bringing your community together over a nice ice cream social, fundraising to replace veterans' headstones, cemeteries, historical value, because there is room. There absolutely is room. We're living examples of this. All of our viewers are examples of this, that we still can embrace and live the cause and the tradition of our Southern heritage in the modern world. It's tweaked in some ways because now we have social media. We obviously dress a little different, but we still have those values of modesty, of family, be a fighter when needed. And when I go and do my presentations, I tell people, as Southerners, we're nice people, but we gotten a little too nice. And I always tell them that you can engage in civil disobedience and be appropriate about it. There's ways to do it. And that's what I proudly preach. These heroes, our Confederate heroes, they wouldn't take no for an answer. They would just do it in a proper, respectful, reverent, civilly disobedient way. That's what you got to be doing in this day and age. And I am so proud to see that our efforts are working. I'll go out there. And when I tell people your point about American culture, in the South, there's standards and there's rules. And I love that. And in psychology, they were trying to demonize that. And I go, no, 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 no. Because they're making it seem like the crazier you are, the better. Or what they'll do is they'll take something that's so deviant, like a 0.01% of the population, and try to normalize that behavior as acceptable, as normal, and try to change the DSM around. I've seen, ridiculousness. And even the parents are now going, I want my child to be a degenerate. That's practically what they've been acting like in recent years. And it's shameful. I can honestly say that if I was one of them, society's throwaways that was going out there and, vandalizing a veterans memorial, attacking it, my family would, number one, have my rear end arrested. And number two, I'd be sleeping on a cardboard box on the side of the street if I was even that lucky. And that is what we have to get back to. We need parents with values. We need society with values. We need communities that have values. This whole idea of taking God out of everything has got to stop. This whole idea of taking our heritage out of everything has got to stop. And one way we do that, and I love this, is what Miss Susan has been doing with the mega flags and the Virginia flaggers.
Yep.
Those amazing flags have caused positive change. There's been people that were evil and degenerate and delinquent moving out of Virginia. There's been Twitter, or now X. This guy was having such a hissy fit. People were trying to lie that the flag was taken down. Everyone's going, nope, it's still up. And he goes, good grief. He says, I'm leaving Virginia. I'm gone. I've had another person say, I can't wait to get out of here. They left Virginia for California. Goodbye, good riddance. Because
even here in the North, one of the big stories that has been in the news in the past few weeks has been about the Confederate flag flying in that western Ohio town.
The mega flag in Ohio. That's right.
And there just the other day there was an article that some twit put out, saying, well, this is Ohio. Why would we be flying a Confederate flag in Ohio? I mean, we had so many thousands that died for, the Union. How hard is it to comprehend that Ohio's borders weren't closed off after the war? I mean, well, first of all, there were Confederate generals from Ohio. Right. One of them being Otto French Strahl, who gave his life for the cause of Southern independence. And then after the war, there were Confederates who moved to Ohio and Michigan and New Jersey, and they had descendants. And you and I are among those descendants. Me in Michigan, you in New Jersey. And so when people say, well, why are they flying a Confederate flag in Ohio, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, wherever? You must be an idiot if you have to ask that question.
Oh, absolutely. And my favorite, right, is people complain about it in Italy. It's all over Italy. England. Oh, there's tons of Confederate flags in England. My buddy, Mr. Derek Edwards, and prospective camp member, he proudly flies those flags in England, has been doing great work out there. My buddy in France, I know several people in France actually that fly the Confederate flag. Australia, Miss Alex from Australia, all over. People love our history and heritage. And I think that now as a society, people are realizing that we have shot ourselves in the foot when we have listened to that loud, deviant, and dangerous 1% of society's rejects. And they realize that this is not the society we want to be. We've realized, especially Save Southern Heritage Florida, they're going to be having it for sale for I think $10. And I can't stress this enough to buy this tape and watch it. Mrs. Z Van Fleet, she survived Maoism. She grew up in Maoism and communism, and she realized, she saw it change. And how that changed was getting rid of tradition, getting rid of heritage, smashing of religious icons that was meaningful to that country, whole historical sites bulldozed. All of that we've seen in Virginia. We've seen it all across Dixie. And the other part was the indoctrination of the youth to take faith away from everything, to take over education, make it seem like being deviant's a good thing. That was the issue that we had. and that they had there, and we have had it right here. It's right in front of our faces. And I asked Mrs. Van Fleet, the big question that we kept, me and several others asked was, did you all see this coming? And she said, no, people had no idea what was happening because it was slow and steady. You had the elders that were very alarmed, but that whole young generation that was indoctrinated would then become the educators of tomorrow that raise that other generation. And together they just kicked the old out. And that is exactly what happened in China. And I pray that we can reverse this from continuing to happen here.
We have to. There is no any other option here. We have to turn the tide. Because if we don't, America is done. It's gone. As long as you and me are here, America is still here in some small way. But we're not going to be here for forever.
The true
and we have to have younger people coming up after us. I still think I'm fairly young, even though I'm 40. And what, you're in your 20s, right, Vinny?
I'm in my 20s. I'm pushing 30, and I'm just like, I feel anxious, y'all. I've been trying to enjoy my 20s while it lasts, and as that clock keeps getting up there, I get nervous and nervous and nervous. So I'm already trying to find my replacement because two things. I ain't going to stay in New Jersey. It ain't going to happen. I won't do it. I've had people bet, no. I am not going to be living in a state where my rights are always in limbo, where you have to deal with corruption on both sides of the aisle, where you got to deal with, Yankees and, people that are Lincolnites, and it's rewarding to educate, but it takes a lot of care, a lot of love. And sometimes you just got to step away from everything, get you a nice stogie, sit on down, get a good book, and just unwind, and a bowl of mint chocolate chip ice cream. What has happened in the last few years, with just New Jersey getting worse and worse, I will be leaving the state when the time is right. And I'm not going to be looking back, and I will not be coming back up here. My family tree had that pattern. They left Jersey for Alabama. We had even some in Kentucky, ended up in Jersey, and it's been like that since. We are trying to go back. We do not want to stay in Jersey. It's that toxic. And while we're here, though, we will continue to clean our graves, to flag the graves, to flag our memorials, to go out flagging and honor our ancestor, because we are a living, breathing Confederate memorial. Every single one of us. And that is my philosophy. You know what? Just like General Lee, I loved his idea of going up to Gettysburg. We are bringing the Confederacy to New Jersey, whether they want it or not. They will see our flags. They will see it on social media. The former, Congressman Tom Malinowski, he was so triggered by us from the New Jersey Flaggers wishing him a Merry Christmas and posting that beautiful gift basket and Stonewall Nutcracker that he had an outrageous meltdown that got solved by thousands online.
I'm telling you, man, it's up to us. And it's a great saying that some of our brothers use. If not us, who? And if not now, when?
And I'll tell you the exact answer. If not now, never. And if not us, Marxists. Plain and simple.
That's right. That's right.
When I say this, I am not being dramatic. But we are dealing with a full-blown Maoist revolution with what is going on. The attitudes, the behaviors. John, Rutgers University in New Jersey, we were seeing the communist flag they're not even hiding it. They're not hiding what they are. And yet you have people on the right that just go, we don't want to offend people. We have people that take what I call the Yankee Union Blue granny panty approach, which is just to ignore and sweep under the rug because you don't want to offend and we don't want to, hurt people's feelings. You got to step on toes sometimes to get somewhere. And I tell people, we've got to be okay, because for far too long, we've been not saying anything as we've been seeing all this nonsense happen. As we saw Mr. Stonewall's memorials come down, as we saw the names get changed, which we're going to put back. And guess what? We've even seen the power of that with small government, with people that are like-minded taking over council. We've had areas where the schools named after Confederate heroes were changed back after they changed them. So we got our names back.
I'm telling you, Vinny, we have the opportunity of a lifetime, and it doesn't, It's not about us. It's not about us at all. I mean, I don't care if anybody ever remembers the name that of my name, personally. But if I can have any effect on making sure that the names of Lee and Jackson and Forrest and Davis and these great Confederate patriots, and even going further back to like John C. Calhoun and Thomas Jefferson and Patrick Henry, if we can keep these names alive and keep their spirit and their cause alive, because they all had the same cause. They all had the same cause of freedom, liberty, individual rights, state rights over federal rights. We have to continue to fight for this. And I'm telling you right now, it's like the time is right to fight, because the situations that are going on in our country today, they're directly connected to what was going on in 1861 to 65. And it has nothing to do with anybody's skin color or what race they are. It has to do with federal government overreach and power, constantly just swallowing up the states, swallowing up the individual. And it's going to continue to happen unless we push back. And as we can see, there is some pushback that's going on.
I love every minute of it, because this is exactly when I tell the war between the states, same ideas, same theme. That and money, reckless spending, unlawful taxation, ridiculous taxation, restriction of personal rights, wanting to control every aspect of society. And this is why I tell people we've got to start being statesmen, right? I consider myself, because my ancestors birth Marylander, Virginian. Do I consider myself a New Jerseyan? Heck no. Right? And when you talk about the true America, Virginia is the mother of all states. But when you look at it in the broader sense, Dixie is the true America, the values. We have got to start with the youth, getting them back into that idea of the statesman mentality versus federalism. We have also got to realize that when we talk about American living, it's really Southern living. How often do you say, I want to live like I'm from New Jersey. I want to have bad language. I don't want to go to church. I want to be represented by the state that has the lowest amount of religious figures. I want to be in a state where, we got them Jersey Shore characters that like to cover themselves and take tanner and wear eyelashes out to here.
I have to admit, I was watching an old TV show from the 80s a few days ago, and one of the characters was talking about that Yankee hospitality, and I cracked up, because what is Yankee hospitality? I mean, they invading, burning down your houses and stealing all your food, killing your crops and your animals, and murdering all the men in your region. I mean,
well, talk about the rudeness. I've experienced Yankee hospitality where people have no table manners. They don't know appropriate dinner conversation. You bring somebody over for a family dinner, their elbows on the table, they're slouching in. They got their practically legs up on your dining room table. They're texting. They're talking about inappropriate stuff that I'm like, this is a conversation for two adults over stogies and, drink, not, when you have a family dinner.
Right. Yes. Yes.
I cannot tell you, growing up, if I ever had the audacity visiting a friend to cuss, to take the Lord's name in vain, to use Anglo-Saxon, my rear end would be feeling it for a lifetime. I have a family member who their friend came over, and I think it was like a birthday party or something for like grandpa. They were over, and every other word was the F-bomb. And finally, after he said it 30 times, I said, you might want to watch your language.
We have this is a personal story. We have neighbors, next door neighbors here where I live. And when they moved in next door, they came from Detroit. Like we're in the burbs of Detroit. They came from Detroit. The mother had two children, both by different men. And the youngest boy, his father had, I guess, legitimately been wrongfully killed by the Detroit Police Department. And when they first came into our area, I mean, I would walk out the back door and you could hear this little boy and his mother cussing each other out.
Ooh.
Cussing each other out. And he befriended my nephew. And if they were at my house and my mother was around, and she heard that little boy talking like that, she'd tell him, "Young man, you need to get back over to your house so you can learn how to talk. When you learn how to talk, you're welcome back over."
You better give your mama a hug from me and say that this is a hug from Cousin Vinny. I love your mom, Mrs. McCleese. I can see her coming out there. "Hey, who do you think you are, young man? You ain't going to be speaking in my house like this."
But you know what? That young man, his older sister, and their mom all came to have a tremendous amount of respect for my mother. And they even considered her to be like the neighborhood grandmother to my mom, because my mom was a woman of integrity. She didn't back down from her principles, but she loved every one of those kids, and they were always welcome as long as they knew you have to behave like a normal human being. Don't behave like a degenerate.
Absolutely. It's just regular human decency. And it's almost like an imposition. And I remember this is the new term I want to teach y'all. I don't know if you've heard of it. Maybe some of the audience when they're watching has heard of this. It's a false ideology belief, the decolonization approach. Do you know what decolonization is, John? It's taking society values and throwing them by the wayside, and it's saying, cuss all that you want to cuss. Us being mindful of language as being a colonizer. Modest dress, being, a good caring Christian. That's like being a colonizer. They demonize it with this term that is totally meaningless. Do they not want to live in nice buildings? Do they not want to, would they rather just live in the woods? They don't really know what they're saying. And they have this false belief when you have standards in the society, in a home, in a community. They want to take all areas out of a wonderful Southern community, demolish it, and just replace it with just a slum. Just what Richmond has become, a sad slum. I went to Hollywood Cemetery. The James River had people blasting music that was full of obscenities. In any other proper town, or try that in a small town, right? When you play up music with obscenities that loud, you bet you are going to get a phone call from your sheriff, if not a visit, and say, if you don't knock it off, you're going to get in a fine. You're going to get punished, because that's not okay. And the lowering of society standards is exactly why we're in this mess with this decolonization term. I had a professor preaching it that, we've got to practice decolonization. So my response is, yeah, I'll dress like a slob. I'll walk in, if I'm going to be counseling a client, just do torn clothes. How the beep are you? How's your beeping day going? Could you just imagine? Like, this is what they want you to act like. And the fact that now, when I was in college, early on my journey, if we had ever mouthed off to a professor, you got punished. And I would never dream of cussing. Now it's just commonplace. And the other thing you see now is, we did a poll when I was doing education and teaching methods, the course. I was in the minority. It was a class of about, I think, probably close to 11, 12. And they polled the class. So all 12 students, and they said, how do you feel about cussing in the classroom? And just, allowing cussing. I was like, oh, no. I was actually deeply offended by that. And it was only one student who was in her 50s or 60s, the professor who was in her 50s, and it was I who was in my 20s. Everybody else was okay with it. I don't see what the problem is. Yeah, I do it all the time in the classroom. Yeah, I cuss in the class. And I'm just like, that's beyond unprofessional. It sets your industry bad. It sets a poor example of modeling. And not to mention, the professor even said the cuss word. Hey, how do you feel if I say, how the beep are you? Go beep yourself. We all were like flinching, us too. The rest of the students go, that's fine. And the professor goes, I just can't believe I'm in the minority in this. She goes, I want to hear from you all. Think it's okay.
But you think about it. I mean, it's a progression that we've gone through. I mean, before we got to this point, it was, well, why should I hold the door open for a woman? Or a woman would say, well, why would I want a man to hold a door open for? I can do it myself. That kind of a thinking process. Why should a young person speak with respectful terms like sir and ma'am to older men and women? These things have progressed or degressed. They've continued to go down. So it continues on and on and on. It's a constant erosion. Somewhere along the way, somebody, you, me, our viewers, and the people around us, we've got to stand up and start putting the blocks of society back up, of a civil society. Now, I'm a person of faith. You're a person of faith. Some of our viewers may or may not be. And I'm not going to preach to them. But what I am going to say is this: even our founding fathers said that our system of government is only good if we have a people who have a moral foundation. Without a moral foundation, our system doesn't work. Guess what? We're living it. The moral foundation is gone, almost completely gone. We've got to bring that foundation back. And if we don't, then the rest will never work. We'll never be able to have government the way it should be without a moral foundation. We'll never be able to have stability in families the way it should be without a moral foundation. Now, we've in that day and age when the founding happened, they based their morals on the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Bible-based moral foundation. That doesn't fly with a lot of people. That's just the way it is, though. I mean, what better foundation is there? Can you think of a better foundation?
I can't.
Because I can't.
Think of a better way of living where you have the true statesman mentality, the true way of living, and just peace, but also freedom. There is no better system.
And to be honest with you, there is a freedom that leads to bondage. When you have a freedom that leads into, I know this is a large word, but licentiousness, deviant behaviors. That's not what we want. What we're talking about when we're talking about freedom.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you have the freedom to do these things, but you also should have the moral compass to say some things you shouldn't do, even though you can do them. Some things you shouldn't say, even though you can say them. If you don't have a moral restraint, it all crumbles.
That's right.
And as we've seen, I personally believe that it was Stonewall Jackson's faith. That was the cornerstone of Stonewall, his faith. And that is what made him able to be a good, upstanding, productive member of society, a good husband, a good friend, a good teacher, a good anything that he was involved in. He did it because he had that faith background and the moral restraint that holds back the deviousness that's within every human being. We can all be capable of bad things, doing bad things, saying bad things, but we have to restrain ourselves from those things. So I would say this: let us seek the freedom that Thomas Jonathan Jackson had, that he fought for. And if we can do that, we're going to be so much better off. These are the things that we're going to have to get back to, or else it's all over with. It's all done. You might as well just kiss it all goodbye.
Ain't that the truth? And say goodbye to our heritage, say goodbye to all that, which I will not ever be willing to do.
Nope. As long as I'm breathing, I'm going to keep honoring our Confederate heroes. Going to keep flying a battle flag. And but will the generation after me? We've got to fight hard for those hearts and minds.
Yes, we do, and influence the youth. We got to win them over. We got to get, and I like to see when families are involved together. Amen. And I've seen examples of that happening. I say it's never too late. Doesn't matter if your child is 15, 17, or 18, or 24. You know, I've seen adults, fathers with their adult sons and daughters getting involved in the heritage groups, getting involved and going out there. It's never too late to get involved and get back to it. Just like you had revival, we need a Southern Renaissance, and we need a Southern revival back into the culture, the religion, the faith. That's what we need.
Amen.
All right, my friend, because I think we have been at this for almost 2 hours.
Well, I apologize for the length of the presentation.
No, you have nothing to apologize for, John, because you are fantastic. And I like how we take what we learn, we have an analytical, educational discussion, and we break it apart. And that's what this is about, y'all. You know, it's more than just going out there with a flag saying heritage, not hate. We actually go out there and explain what it means. And this right here is a perfect source that I tell people, show them a video. Most people don't even read anymore, but now we have videos at least that can be something. And maybe it will just inspire them to pick up an audiobook and kind of shape them into picking up a book and reading it.
We can only hope. And thanks to everybody who's tuned in to watch. Thank you, Vinny, for having me on tonight. It's always, like I said, an honor and a privilege to be able to come on here. I'm looking forward to coming back here maybe sometime in maybe March or something and giving part 2 of the Stonewall Jackson series. And who knows, maybe between now and then I'll pop in with you guys when you're doing the rap back and forth with all the other fellas.
Please do. You're a member of our team, John. And if anything, I should be thanking you for all the hard work you put into this, the time and dedication, which clearly shows the quality, the use of pictures to just support what you're saying and really bring it to life and all that. I notice it and we appreciate it. I do. Everybody else in the team does. You're a valued member like everyone else. And I tell people, I'm just one person. I met someone in Virginia that was like starstruck. I said, hey, listen, I'm just one person. When it's my time to meet the Lord, no one's going to remember Vinny Balducci, if anything, I want them to remember the projects I helped do, keeping the flags up, putting up new memorials, donating books, the charitable stuff. That is how I'm going to live on through. And our ancestors, when I become a father one day, passing down the heritage to them is so important.
Well, it's I enjoy putting these things together. I benefit myself by doing it. I get more out than I can possibly put back out to you all because we don't even have the time to go through everything that I've read or whatnot on Stonewall Jackson. But I also enjoy, finding the images. I don't necessarily have them together when I first start the presentation. But then I go on the hunt to start trying to find the pictures that go along with it. And if nothing else, at least the pictures keep everybody from having to look at my ugly mug for an hour while I talk.
Oh, you're too much. You're too much.
All right, sir. Let me just close with this. I want to say thank you to everybody that's watching. Thank you to everybody that's out there that's involved in working to preserve our honorable Confederate heritage. Whether you're SCV, UDC, Children of the Confederacy, if you're one of the flagger groups, Virginia flaggers, Tar Heel flaggers, New Jersey flaggers, Awesome work. Save Southern Heritage Florida. God bless you guys. You guys are doing fantastic work out there. Keep it up. The fight is on, and you guys are leading the charge down there. Everybody that's involved, whether you're involved heavily or a little bit, every little bit adds up. Every little bit helps, and all of us can maybe do a little more. Just let's all not stop. Whatever we do, don't give up. Don't stop talking about it. Don't stop telling other people. Don't stop flying the battle flag.
Absolutely.
It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's not scary. It's not a porno mag that you need to hide under a mattress. You need to put that thing out there and show people, hey, this is something that really is worth being proud of. So congratulations to all of you who are working. I'm telling you, we're all in this boat together. I'm happy to do my part. I'm thankful for everybody else that's doing theirs. And thanks again for having me on, Vinny.
John, thank you for coming on, and thank you for giving this presentation. You have no idea how grateful I am for you, and I love your sense of humor because it was so I needed that laughter this week. And y'all, again, as always, never back down. Keep fighting. Y'all stay Southern, and Deo Vindice, y'all. And thank
Deo
you.
Vindice.
Deo Vindice. And also, y'all, before I end this, I just want to tell y'all, my prompt for y'all, I want y'all to comment and then share. So 2 requests. That ain't that hard. Share this video at least one time to y'all's page or personal page or group. And I want y'all to comment. Number 1, what did y'all learn from Mr. John's presentation? It needs to be as long as a piece of string, as long as it needs to be. What did y'all learn that was new? And the second thing is, what are y'all going to be doing to fight for Dixie? With that being said, stay Southern, and Deo Vindice.
Deo Vindice.